Here's something worth understanding. Every generation gets labeled, but Gen Z might be the most misread generation in recent memory. Dismissed as distracted, criticized as fragile, accused of being too online, too sensitive, too politically charged. But psychology tells a more layered story, and that story is worth paying attention to, not just if you are Gen Z, but if you live or work alongside them. Gen Z is roughly defined as those born between 1997 and 2012. They are the first generation to have grown up entirely within the digital age, not just with technology, inside it. From early childhood, their social development, identity formation, and emotional processing all happened in environments shaped by algorithms, notifications, and the constant presence of a curated social world. That context matters enormously, because psychology doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in response to environment. The first psychological characteristic of Gen Z is a heightened threat sensitivity. This isn't weakness, this is adaptation. Research in developmental psychology shows that brains calibrate their threat detection systems based on early environmental input. Gen Z grew up during a period of compounding instability, the 2008 financial crisis in their formative years, a global pandemic during adolescence, climate anxiety as a constant background presence, and social media amplifying conflict and uncertainty at scale. A brain that developed in that environment doesn't overreact to threat. It responds exactly as it was calibrated to respond. The heightened anxiety that defines much of Gen Z's psychological profile isn't a malfunction. It's a nervous system that learned early that the world is genuinely unpredictable. The second characteristic is a more fluid relationship with identity. Previous generations tended to construct identity around fixed anchors: career, nationality, religion, family role. These provided stability, but also rigidity. Gen Z approaches identity differently. Research consistently shows they are more likely to see identity as layered, evolving, and self-defined rather than inherited. This shows up in how they talk about mental health, gender, sexuality, values, and professional purpose, all with a flexibility that previous generations often interpret as instability. It isn't instability, it's a different operating model for selfhood, one built for a world where certainty is scarce and adaptability is survival. Now pause here for a second. Think about what it would mean to grow up with your entire social life visible, measurable, and publicly compared from early adolescence. Every friendship, every achievement, every physical appearance, constantly ranked by engagement metrics. That's not just a new technology. That's a fundamentally different psychological environment for developing a sense of self. The third characteristic is what psychologists call a collapsed public-private boundary. For generations before Gen Z, there was a clear distinction between who you were in public and who you were in private. That gap gave people space to fail quietly, develop slowly, and construct identity without an audience. Gen Z largely grew up without that gap. Social media collapsed it, and the psychological consequence, documented consistently in research, is an increase in what psychologists call self-presentational anxiety, a chronic concern with how one is perceived, performing even in nominally private spaces, and a difficulty accessing genuine rest from social evaluation. This is why Gen Z reports higher rates of loneliness, despite being more digitally connected than any previous generation. Connection and genuine intimacy are not the same thing, and the environment they grew up in provided enormous amounts of the first and significantly less of the second. The fourth characteristic is a pragmatic idealism. Gen Z is often called the most politically aware and socially conscious generation in recorded history, but their relationship with change is more nuanced than pure idealism. They have grown up watching institutions fail, watching promises not kept, watching systems that were supposed to work not working, and the psychological result is a generation that holds genuine values about how the world should be, while simultaneously maintaining a deep skepticism about whether those in power will act on them. Psychologists call this disenchanted engagement, caring deeply while trusting sparingly. It isn't apathy, it's a rational response to the evidence they've accumulated. So what does all of this tell us? It tells us that Gen Z's psychological profile, the anxiety, the fluid identity, the social exhaustion, the skeptical idealism, makes complete sense when you understand the environment that shaped it. They aren't broken, they aren't soft. They are the product of a world that changed faster than any previous generation had to navigate. And perhaps the most important thing psychology tells us about Gen Z is this: they know something the generations before them are still learning. That certainty is rare, that identity is built, not given, and that the world requires a different kind of resilience than the one that came before.